I mean, this is neither here nor there. I love Aaron's response when Moses grills him on this, and Moses says, "What have you done?" And Aaron says, "They gave me their golden jewelry, and I threw it into the fire, and this came out."
Right.
It's like the kind of excuse you'd expect from your 5-year-old.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year everybody. Welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is the final episode of 2018, episode number 151, brought to you again by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Check them out at cooksholsters.com. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST, that's all one word, ARMEDPODCAST, and save 15% off your order at cooksholsters.com. Again, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your day, a part of your week, and a part of your year. This is our final episode of 2018, and as I mentioned previously, today we have another Best of show featuring segments from this year, 2018. We've got tips from Sergeant Bill, from former contributor Aaron Israel, from Mia Anstein, and another segment of Clinging to God and Guns with Pastor John Bennett. For newer listeners who have maybe just joined us in the last few weeks, these episodes should be a treat for you. And over the last, if you go back to episode 149, 148, where we reviewed some of our best episodes, our best segments from 2017 and 2016, you'll get an idea of some of the excellent moments, some of the great content that you've missed over the years. If you would like access to all of our past episodes, every segment that we've ever produced, and exclusive content that we created that was never intended to be released on the podcast, join the Reformation Gun Club. Check that out at gunclub.armedlutheran.us for just $24 a year. You get all of that plus some cool swag, member discounts from some great companies like Talon Gun Grips, Inline Fabrication, Gunbox Gun Safes, and a lot more. Plus, like I said, exclusive content never released on the podcast. Check that out at gunclub.armedlutheran.us and find out more. All right, next week we're going to be back with a new episode, all new content coming your way. The first episode of 2019, that'll be episode number 152, coming your way next Sunday. Before we get started, one last request before the end of the year. If you like what you've heard here on Armed Lutheran Radio, please share the show with your friends, with your church, with your family. Share it on social media. Drop by iTunes and leave us a review. Tell us how you think we're doing. Visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback and send us comments or questions. We would love to hear from you and to respond to those comments or questions on the show. All right, that's enough of that. Time to get started with this Best of 2018 show. We hope you enjoy it, and we'll talk to you again in 2019. Let me take a minute to tell you a little bit about our good friends at G4G Guns. After surviving an attempted kidnapping and having co-workers robbed at gunpoint, Patrick and Cassie Coburn decided to get a gun for protection, and that led them to teach others about the need to protect themselves and to be proficient with firearms, and that led to the creation of G4G Guns. It's an amazing store and an even more amazing website where you can shop for any gun, ammunition, accessories from the comfort of your own home and buy without any gimmicks or credit card fees. If you want the personal touch, visit their store at 175 Bear Road in Van Alstyne, Texas, or stop by and see them at a gun show near you on the weekends. They're great people. They offer great service, great prices, an amazing selection, and no hidden fees or gimmicks. Check them out at g4gguns.com. That's G, the number 4, guns.com. G4G Guns, the galaxy for great guns. g4gguns.com.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstein.
Hey everybody, thank you for having me with you for another week. I'm so happy to be here with you, sharing some experiences and tips. And last week I talked to you about a gun handling mistake, not an accident, because I don't believe any of them are accidents. It was a mistake. This week I want to talk to you about another possible gun handling mistake. However, there was no gun involved. Was the mistake that maybe there should have been one? As I recount the story, I want you to know that this is one of my very good friends. He is a very experienced gun handler. He is also a very giving person and willing to help anybody. Can that be a downfall? We've all heard those stories, the incidents of what would you do if there was a knock at your door late at night? Would you help that person? Do you turn them away? So my friend had a knock on his door late at night. He has several hunting hounds. They are all out in the yard. They are barking and causing a ruckus. How interesting that somebody came up the driveway to knock on the door of this house. He got out of bed and he checked the door, and there was a man standing there. He said he needed help. He was having trouble with his vehicle just up the road. So my friend, he's a very nice person, as I mentioned. He put on his jacket and his shoes, loaded up in his girlfriend's car, and headed up the road to help this poor guy with his broken down car. The late night caller, he happened to be an illegal immigrant. He was from Mexico, and he spoke in very broken English and explained to my friend that he thinks his transmission is broken in his car. So as they headed up the highway in the darkness of the night, he found the vehicle on the side of the road. They pulled up, left the vehicle running so that the headlights could shine into the broken down car. In his broken English, he said and explained, maybe I need to check the transmission fluid because the vehicle still ran. It just wouldn't go very well, wouldn't accelerate. So my friend opened the hood, and as he looked to lean in and peer into the engine compartment, he was cold-cocked from behind, knocked down, and at the same time stabbed in the throat. The immigrant ran to the vehicle, which was still running. He jumped in. My friend jumped up and ran to the passenger side, trying to jump into the car, although he had been wounded. And the immigrant continued to stab at him as he tried to get in the passenger side door. Eventually, as the man sped away, my friend was dragged along the ground and let go and watched as the car sped off, leaving him out there in a rural area in the darkness. He hopped in the broken down vehicle, which I said kind of moved a little bit. He limped it down the highway, which was luckily, fortunately, a downhill slope, till he got it close to his driveway, and then he made his way up to his own house, where his girlfriend found him at the door bleeding, and they called for help. Lifelight took him to Denver, Colorado, where they treated his wounds. And this is something we talk about, what to wear, what to do. Should he have taken a gun with him, with that stranger? Should he have helped him at all? Should he have just called a tow truck? What would you have done? Think about that. Let us know at the Reformation Gun Club. Tell us your comments, what you would do. Come to find out, this illegal immigrant, he sped away more than 80 miles he drove in a stolen vehicle, where the police eventually laid out tack strips and popped the tires of the vehicle, causing him to careen off an embankment, rolling then totaling the car. So they both end up in the hospital. They both end up in the same hospital. Needless to say, the man is facing charges of attempted homicide. My friend had a big, bushly, Grizzly Adams beard, which I personally don't care for. But it may have been that very beard that saved his life, deflecting the blade of the knife so that it couldn't pierce through his arteries and his neck. Should you have a beard? There's another question. What do you think my friend is going to do now? He is at home. He's doing well. He is recovering. He's having difficulty speaking, but he's going to be all right. We're very happy about this. I want to know, what's he going to do now? One thing that he has indicated, he's definitely going to be speaking out in support of banning illegal immigrants. This is a huge issue in our country, and it happens more than you know. This report won't be in the mainstream media. There's so many of these kind of incidents that don't occur in the news. It's a small town paper, and there it is in the headlines. This friend that just helped somebody who knocked at his door in the middle of the night. So those are thoughts to think of. I don't mean to be somber, but what would you do? Are you going to grab a gun if somebody knocks on your door at 3 a.m? If you do grab your gun, do you brandish it? Are you going to call for help? What are you going to do when these people come and ask for help? We all want to be helpful. We all want to be supportive. But could this happen to you? I hope that sharing this scenario with you serves as a reminder. You have to have a plan. You need to share your plan, and you need to rehearse your plan. Stay safe, you all. On that note, I want to share with you something else. I am headed to a not real life event. It is a act or theater. I'm headed to a mystery at the supposedly said to be haunted historic Strater Hotel in Durango, Colorado. I am headed down there for their mystery weekend where we will be seeing who the murderer is and solving some mysteries. It should be a lot of fun. Maybe I can find some tips there and share them with you next week. Have a great week. Bye, guys.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstein.com.
Hey guys, it's Mia here. If you follow me on social media, you know that I often share morning inspiration. Many people ask how I can keep this up every day. Well, it starts with my morning readings and that perfect cup of coffee. The official Dunkin' Donuts shop provides coffee lovers with everything they need, from K-Cup pods, original blended coffee, tea, drinkware, and more. Who doesn't want Dunkin' delivered to their front door? Shop today at www.armedlutheran.us/coffee and help support Armed Lutheran Radio today.
I want to take a minute here to thank our partner, the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. If you're involved in a situation where you have to use your firearm in self-defense, you very well may find yourself in a legal battle against overzealous prosecutors or the families of the criminal who you shot or threatened, who are looking to deprive you of your freedom or your hard-earned savings. You may find yourself charged with a crime or facing a civil lawsuit even if you did nothing wrong. That's where Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network comes in. For a small yearly fee, they will provide you with money for attorneys, money for bail, consultations, and access to experts like Marty Hayes and Massad Ayub. Don't face the fight alone. Visit Armed Citizens Network today. Use the promo code ARMEDLutheran-25. Save $25 off your first year's membership, or you can grab the coupon on my website, armedlutheran.us. Sign up today. They will send you lots of cool resources, 8 instructional DVDs, and a book by Massad Ayub that I cannot recommend highly enough. Don't wait until you need their help. Be prepared. Sign up today. Visit armedcitizensnetwork.org.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this is your Ballistic Minute. So I heard a new term for a disease that is sweeping through the gun culture and specifically through competition shooting. It's called GAS, or Gear Acquisition Syndrome. There are a lot of people I know that have GAS. They always have to have the latest, the greatest, the newest gun. That Shadow 2. Get it milled to put an optic on it. Shave some weight out of it and cut some stuff out of the slide so you could shoot it in IDPA. Or Double Alpha's got new mag pouches. Or I heard there's somebody else that makes a new bullet that's got some super coating on it. People, find out what works for you, what's comfortable for you to shoot. Find the gear that works for you, that you can afford, and shoot it, and practice with it. I've also heard the saying that, don't be afraid of the guy with a bunch of guns. Be afraid of the guy with only one gun and knows how to use it. I heard somebody else do a different version of that on a different podcast, and they said, don't be worried about the competitor with the $5,000 gun and $500 worth of training. Be worried about the guy with the $500 gun and $5,000 worth of training. So figure out what gear works for you. Stop playing with it and just shoot. And now I'm not saying don't try other stuff, don't shoot other guns. I mean, competitive shooting is a sport. It is supposed to be fun. But if you really want to excel, you need to pick one gun, stick with it, and get better. The skills that you increase and get better with that one gun are going to translate to every other gun. Some guns feel a little bit different. They might point a little different or whatever, but that's a training issue, and that doesn't take long to overcome. So if you've got GIS, there's one way to get over it. Pick your gear, pick your gun, practice, and train. I'm Sergeant Bill. This has been your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
Hey there, this is Sergeant Bill. After the successful completion of a match, Lloyd and I like to get together and top it off with a celebratory cigar. We get our post-match cigars from Cigar Page, home of America's best cigar deals. Visit armedlutheran.us/cigar and get a great deal. And also, help support Armed Lutheran Radio.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to relate to you a tragic story that happened over the Christmas holiday, and I want to give you a rule of thumb that'll help you from making a similar tragic mistake as the guy in the story. So this story comes out of Coleman, Alabama. Family and friends of 22-year-old Logan Trammell are gathering to remember the young musician after an accidental shooting took his life on Christmas Eve. Trammell's family says he was driving away from his parents' home around 11:30 on Sunday in one of his father's vehicles when it happened. His father was unaware that his son was trying to borrow his truck. Fearing the vehicle was being stolen, the family says he yelled out and fired a warning shot in the air in an attempt to get the driver's attention. They say he then shot once at the tailgate to try to stop whoever was taking the truck. Once the truck stopped, they say his father realized he had accidentally shot and killed his own son. And I'm going to stop reading the story there. So let's dissect a little bit of what happened in this situation. So when you realize, if this was you, that you are having a piece of property in your vehicle stolen out of your driveway, you're really not in any reasonable fear for your life at that point. If I look out the window from my studio right now and I see somebody trying to steal my truck, I am not in any physical danger inside the house right now. So the smart thing to do, and what this guy should have done, is to call the police and say, hey, somebody is stealing my vehicle. It looks like this is the license plate, this is my address where it's leaving from. Can you please stop the guy who's trying to steal my vehicle, right? And hopefully they pull the guy over and they're able to get your car. But even if they don't, the worst thing you've got to deal with is making an insurance claim for stolen property, which you're going to at least get something for. And if you tell me you don't have insurance, well, you need to have insurance. Get insurance on your vehicles, and you'll be able to cover a situation like this, at least to a certain extent. I'd rather be dealing with the hassle of insurance and be alive than have the potential of what this guy did on accident. So a lot of people say, hey, The mistake was made when this guy didn't properly identify his threat, and I think that is incorrect. The mistake was made when he went out to use deadly force to protect his property because he didn't need to, because his life was not in danger. So even if he had identified the threat and it was a bad guy and he could clearly identify the bad guy, he didn't need to go out there, because guess what the bad guy, if he's a violent criminal, could have done? Well, he could have turned around and shot him. He could have run him over. He could have fired at the house, and a bullet could have gone in and struck somebody that it didn't need to strike in the house, right? So all kinds of bad outcomes besides just shooting the wrong guy could have happened in this situation, because he's instigating a confrontation that he doesn't need to instigate over a mere piece of property. Now, me being a Christian, and a lot of us who listen to Armed Lutheran Radio, I hope are Christians as well, I value human life over every material possession that I have, and I'm talking about all human life. There is nothing that I own in my house or in my shed or in my driveway that is worth taking a human life to protect. The reason I own firearms is not to protect any of my stuff or even my home. My firearm is to protect the people who live inside my home, starting with me and extending out to my wife and daughter. So if I'm not in danger and my wife and daughter are not in danger, I'm not going to put myself or them in danger in order to protect a piece of property. A lot of people will ask me the question. They'll go ahead and say, yeah, I understand if that's my truck, but what if the guy comes into my house? That changes things for me. Well, not necessarily. It shouldn't be a foregone conclusion that you're going to have a deadly force confrontation even if there's an intruder in your home. I've talked before about evade, barricade, respond on this podcast. So your first priority in a home defense situation ought to be to get away from the bad guy, to evade if you can. Then you arm yourself as quickly as you can, and if you can barricade yourself in a room, like I plan to barricade in my daughter's room, I've got a deadbolt on the door, and I've got a backup gun and a medical kit and a cell phone staged in there, and that's where I plan to barricade. And if I can get to that barricade spot and put a locked door between me and the bad guy, then hopefully it's going to give me enough time to call the police and let them come and have a confrontation with the bad guy. Because even inside my home, if I can avoid the fight altogether, then that's what I'm going to do. Now, there are certain situations where you can avoid the fight. Either you can't get to a barricade position, you can't evade and get out of the house. Maybe you're in a situation where by the time you realize that your house is being invaded, you're already in fear for your life and the guy is right there in the room with you. And if that's the case, or maybe they break through your barricade, then you do what you got to do. You use deadly force and you protect your life. But at that point, you're not protecting your home. You're not protecting your property. You're protecting your life because you have a reasonable fear that your life is in danger. That is not the case just because someone is in your house, and it's especially not the case if someone is breaking into your shed or trying to take your vehicle or steal something out of your vehicle, or whatever the case is where you are not physically there and you're not in any danger in that moment and you have no reasonable fear for your life. So to summarize, the rule of thumb is don't use deadly force to protect property. That is a bad idea. If you do it, all kinds of bad outcomes can happen. Now, let's say that you don't take my advice and you do get into a confrontation with someone over property. Even if you win that confrontation, which, as I said, is not guaranteed, you might end up bleeding out next to the property you were trying to protect. Even if you do survive and you put the bad guy down, your state law might allow for that. It might be justified legally speaking, but you may still have to go to court and prove it, right? The judge and the jury might not see it the same way that you do. The black letter law might mean one thing to you, and it might get applied in a different way. If you read case law, that happens a lot of times, and even if you go to court and you prevail, you're talking about thousands of dollars in legal bills. You're talking about a long, drawn-out process that could take years. It's going to damage your reputation. It's going to make you have to take off a whole bunch of days at work and all that sort of stuff when you could have just made a stolen property claim on your insurance and hopefully gotten some money back, right? And I'd rather be alive, like I said, and dealing with insurance than dead or potentially having a big court battle to clear my name. So there just isn't any good justification for getting involved and potentially escalating to deadly force when property is all that is at stake. The only time deadly force should be a thing that should be a real option for you is when it's immediately necessary in that moment to protect yourself from death or serious bodily injury. And if you have no reasonable perception that you are in danger of death or serious bodily injury, then you don't need to instigate a confrontation, right? And so if you follow that rule of thumb, then you're going to avoid a whole lot of situations. Now, as with all rules of thumb, there are no absolutes. I'm sure you can think right now in your head of some kind of crazy hypothetical situation where the property that you're trying to protect is so valuable and essential to your life that maybe it's worth potentially dying for. I can't think of anything that I own that rises to that level. But if you can, I'll go ahead and grant that maybe there's some exceptions to that, but I doubt you'd be able to convince me even with the hypothetical that you've made up. But if you follow that rule of thumb of don't use deadly force to protect property, then you're going to avoid not only potentially shooting someone who doesn't need to be shot, which could be your kid breaking back into the house after they snuck out. It could be the situation like this guy where the kid was trying to borrow your truck and didn't tell you about it. Or even could be your drunk neighbor who's trying to go into the wrong house because he forgot which house he lives in. There's all kinds of stories just like that about people shooting the wrong guy inside their house because he went to the wrong door. So just don't do it, and that's going to be the best rule of thumb for you. Use of deadly force, your firearm, is to protect the life of your family and your own life, and not any of the things that you own. And if you follow that rule, you're going to make a lot of good decisions. That's your personal defense tip for the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Let me take a moment to tell you about our good friends at cooksholsters.com. Not only are they a sponsor of the show and the Armed Lutheran Radio Shooting Team, they're a company that I trust and believe in. Why? Well, when I first got into concealed carry, when I got my concealed carry permit, it was really amazing how much I didn't know. I picked up a holster from my local range, one of those cheap prophylactic holsters, you know the kind. They collapse when you take the gun out. You can't reholster them safely. I have to admit, I was one of those guys. When I started learning more and taking classes and reading and watching videos, I found out that there are better holsters out there. I learned about the advantage of Kydex holsters, and that's how I discovered Cook's Holsters. What makes Cook so special as opposed to other holster makers? They make an outstanding product. They sell printed Kydex to many of the other holster makers, and their subsidiary business, Cook's Molds, actually makes the molds that other holster manufacturers use. Cook's Holsters is an American success story. Born in the founder's basement, Cook's Holsters grew so much that Mr. Cook left his job to make holsters full-time, and he hired people to help fill orders and meet demand. Custom molded to fit your firearm, Cook's Holsters are available in a wide array of colors and printed patterns, including your own artwork. They're available for carry, for range work, and for competition. Check them out at cooksholsters.com. They're adding new gun models every month. I trust them for everyday carry and for competition. Visit them today. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and save 15% off your order. They offer a lifetime warranty and a 100% money-back guarantee if you're not satisfied. Check them out at cooksholsters.com.
Up next, we're clinging to God and guns with Pastor John Bennett.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for another Clinging to God and Guns with our good friend Pastor John Bennett, pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. Pastor, welcome back.
You hear that? That's my maximum strength Excedrin, so I'm ready to roll.
Fully prepared.
Yes.
Well, it should be a doozy. We're dipping back into Pathos.com. It seems to be, they're on a roll lately.
They just can't help themselves.
Well, and we've mentioned this before, since the Las Vegas shooting, it seems like things that we've found have been uglier and just, we keep saying that this is the worst thing we've ever come across, but then somehow you keep finding something worse.
Right. Yes.
You have a knack for it. This one is called The Heresy of the Day, Antinomianism, and it's by Mark Shea. It was released back in November following the Las Vegas shooting. Shea is apparently a Catholic writer, apparently from his blog at Pathos. He's described at the National Catholic Register website as a popular author and speaker. And after you read this, you'll wonder why.
Popular for all the wrong reasons.
Right. Oh, well, aside from his blog and hating Trump and writing a book, I'm not sure exactly what his creds are, but let's see. He's clearly ticked off. This, like I said, this is written right several weeks after the Las Vegas shooting. He's clearly pissed that nothing's been done to ban stuff that makes him feel uncomfortable. And he's just venting there's very little in this, interestingly enough. There's very little scriptural in this, and it's just venting his spleen and really horrible regurgitation of, all the typical anti-gun cliches. And he starts out with a definition of antinomianism. One being one who holds that under the gospel dispensation of grace, the moral law is of no use or obligation because faith alone is necessary to salvation, or one who rejects a socially established morality.
But here's the problem. Well, he got that directly from the Merriam-Webster dictionary.
Okay.
Any guesses where the term antinomianism originates from? It comes from Luther.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, Luther was the one who coined this term. He's the first ever mention of this term is from Luther, and it goes back to 1527 with the antinomian controversy. A professor by the name of Johannes Agricola was teaching at Wittenberg that basically Christians don't need the law. They're no longer under the law because they're under grace. That it's not the law that brings one to repentance and contrition over sin, but rather it's the gospel alone. Well, Paul is the one who said, if the law had said, do not covet, I would not have known it was a sin to covet. Just, that's a very rough paraphrase, not a direct quotation.
Right.
Luther actually barred Agricola from teaching any further until he recanted, but the weaselly rascal that Agricola was, he continued to teach secretly this antinomianism. So this guy doesn't even have a grasp on what antinomianism is because he's relying on Merriam-Webster to give him the definition. And I'm sure he prefers the second point of Merriam-Webster's definition, that one who rejects a socially established morality. It's not society that establishes morality. It is God who is the origin of all moral behavior.
Right.
So, if we take the second definition, well, then it's every single sin that people enjoy in this country that society has given their imprimatur on is perfectly okay.
And
just
so
because society says it is.
Right. And if society defines something as, or if society wants to deem something as illegal, like gun ownership, then if you oppose that, you must reject society's established morality.
That's where I'm guessing where he's going. That, hey, society says that guns are bad, and if you don't reject that, then you're an antinomian.
Antinomianism, he says, is a favorite heresy of the gun cult. And this is fun. The gun cult, just to refresh your memory, is not people who enjoy shooting or collecting guns. The gun cult, in a word, but he uses more than a word, is anybody who prefers the good known as a gun over the higher good of human life and who acts to exalt guns and arms industry profits at the cost of human life. Calling us a cult is rich, coming from a guy who, prays to saints and thinks that a guy in a funny hat in Rome is infallible, but I digress.
Which, if you read some of his other blog posts, I just quickly looked at some of the titles and the summaries. He really likes Pope Frankie. The first SJW Pope.
Yes. I got the impression that he would like him very much. One of the lies the gun cult tells in order to achieve this end is the lie of antinomianism. It goes like this: you can't outlaw evil. That's not antinomianism. What the hell? He gives a definition and then doesn't even... Good Lord.
The stupid is strong with this one.
Well, first, before we move on, I actually searched for this exact quote that he's put here, and he put this thing in quotes. You can't outlaw evil. And I found like 3 uses of it. One was a kid from UT Austin who was asked his thoughts about Campus Carry back in 2015. Another one was actually a liberal back in 2013 who said, "Yeah, we can't outlaw evil, but we can outlaw guns." And so I don't know where the only thing I can figure is he's responding to people like Governor Matt Bevin, who said after the Las Vegas shooting that we can't regulate evil. Maybe that's what he is referring to. I couldn't find this exact phrase, but
it's like we've said on this before. Murder is already illegal,
right?
What's interesting though is he's taking a broad definition of antinomianism, which just literally means against the law, and we already have this law called the Second Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
So who's a stinking antinomian now, man?
Well, the suggestion that we're antinomians because we want to keep our guns and oppose gun control suggests that we are sinners by having guns, but we figure we can keep on sinning because of God's grace.
I guess.
Right?
I guess.
Because isn't that what the basis for, the whole antinomian thing is not necessarily an opposition to temporal laws, but that we can sin freely because we know we're saved.
Right. And I don't know if that was Agricola's intention, but that's where his teachings led.
Right.
That we can live however we please because we have the gospel. And, well, that's not what Paul says in Romans 6, where he says that just because we have grace, should we go on sinning? Absolutely not. But and I think all of this comes back to taking the second point of Merriam-Webster's definition, one who rejects a socially established morality. So because he lives in this bubble, this microcosm of liberalism and anti-gun sentiment, he just projects his perception on the rest of society and says, society has established this as morality and you're rejecting it, so you're an antinomian. It's just, I thank God I took my Excedrin this morning.
Another episode sponsored by Excedrin Migraine Relief.
You should start getting sponsorship for that. We've given them a lot of free advertising.
I really should. I think I will reach out to Tylenol or whoever the people are who make that stuff. Because, yeah, we're probably driving people to their door.
Either that or Jim Beam.
Yes, absolutely. That just opens up a whole new possibilities for sponsorship. This lie is trotted out to passionately defend one form of evil and one only: gun violence. If we took this lie seriously across the board, it would mean the elimination of all law and attempts at fighting crime in every segment of human society. That it is a lie, a cynical, idiotic, absurd, and stupid lie, is seen the moment every law and order conservative who regurgitates it turns from defending his gun idol, in all caps, to any other sin, crime, or trespass in the world. You sure as hell did not hear Donald Trump say you can't outlaw evil when a Muslim killed 8 people in Lower Manhattan the other day. All of a sudden, law could do a lot, according to the people who insist law can do nothing when a white guy is mowing down 500 people with a gun. Jeez, he goes racist.
Yes, he does. Surprise, surprise. But he basically makes the jump that for those who hold to this principle that, murder is already illegal, or as he puts it, you can't outlaw evil, that, well, if that's the case, then we should just get rid of all laws if you can't outlaw it.
There's not a single person on earth who's proposing that. Well, there might be some weirdo, but that's not at all what we're saying. because we don't want more laws doesn't mean we want none. What the hell? We already have a crap load of laws. Nobody's suggesting that laws don't serve a purpose or that we should not fight crime. That's just, talking about idiotic and absurd. Gun control does nothing to stop stuff like Las Vegas or Sutherland Springs because the laws that they propose don't work.
Right.
That's why we oppose them. Not because we're antinomians.
Yeah, if only we had stricter gun laws in Chicago.
Right, yeah. That'll work out great. And the line about the Muslim kid who killed 8 people in New York, just a subtle swipe to suggest that gun people are racists. But the reason that Trump didn't say that you can't outlaw evil after the attack in New York is because nobody on the left was suggesting we ban cars.
Right.
Or that we make it harder for Muslims to drive them.
Let's be fair. We have a lot of environmental wackadoos that think we would all be riding bicycles, but...
Well, that's true. See, that wouldn't have happened if we were all riding bikes.
That's
would have
right.
been kind of... All he would have done is knock people over.
You might have used a horse and carriage instead.
That's right. And, of course, the people who lie that law is worthless... Nobody is arguing that law is worthless.
It sounds like he's the one that's arguing law is worthless.
Really? He's trying to convince people that that's what we think. All he's doing is proving how stupid he is. Nobody on earth is making this argument. Of course, the people who lie that the law is worthless because you can't outlaw evil believe so deeply that the law is not worthless when it comes to abortion that they will stake absolutely everything on the quixotic faith that electing an incompetent, corrupt sex predator who spits in the faces of Gold Star families and POWs will be absolutely worth it when he outlaws the evil of abortion by magic. So now the true face comes out. It's like he's just going to let his...
In case anybody didn't catch that, he's talking about Trump.
Yes. He's letting the...
And the POW he's referring to was Trump's rudeness to John McCain.
Oh, well, and the Khan family, the guy that the Democrat Party trotted out during their convention. But not even to address the stupid Trump stuff, because it's not even remotely related, except to just indicate to us that this is all politics and not actual deep thought. Nobody is saying that the law is worthless. What we're saying is that the laws we have should actually work. And passing laws just for the sake of, adding another law to make it more illegaler is, to use this guy's own words, it's worthless.
Right. Well, here's the blind stupidity here that he accuses pro-life people of thinking that if they just elect the right people that, they'll magically outlaw abortion. But he is sitting here advocating that if we had stricter gun laws, we could magically get rid of gun violence.
Yep.
And let's be honest, there aren't any rational thinking pro-life advocates that think that we're ever going to completely get rid of abortion. It's never going to happen. We can't do it. And I'm not saying that because I'm some sort of fatalist, but it is the law, and no matter what, no matter how much we fight, we're not going to fully get rid of all forms of abortion. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I wish it would. But he's the one who, in his blind stupidity, thinks that if we just have the right laws, we're going to get rid of gun violence.
But the funny thing is that the kind of laws that he wants to see passed, even the people who suggest them say they wouldn't have stopped any of the previous shootings.
Exactly.
So why the hell are we even fighting to pass them?
Beats me. Just because it makes him feel better.
Yeah. I mean, if your only reasoning for supporting a law or a proposed piece of legislation is that the gun cult is going to hate it, maybe that's the problem. Maybe we need to actually look at what we're trying to accomplish. But that's not the purpose of legislation, I guess. If you're a leftist, it's not. The lie that you can't outlaw evil is as an excuse for doing absolutely nothing to oppose the evil of gun violence is just that, a lie. Of course, why did he put asterisks around that? Are we supposed to say that or read that?
Because it looks fancy.
It looks fancy. Of course, you will never eliminate evil in the world by force of law. But nonetheless, you do try to craft laws that will help fight and reduce works of evil and punish those who do them. We already have laws that punish those who do works of evil. What the? We have laws, like you said, we have laws against murder. We've got laws against rape and burglary and assaulting people. We even have, I know based on this article, he doesn't realize this. We already have laws that determine who can and cannot purchase or own guns.
Right.
But we only enforce those less than 1% of the time when they're violated. So, and that's why we have everything from the USDA keeping you from being poisoned to laws against burglary. If a given law does not work or can be improved, you replace it or improve it. If somebody breaks into your house, you don't declare laws against burglary futile and pointless. You do not lie that since all evil cannot be eliminated, all law is futile. Again, we're not... we're not suggesting that laws are futile. And the USDA doesn't keep us from being poisoned.
Yes. How often do you hear about Chipotle being in the news because somebody got gonorrhea from their lettuce or something, you know?
Well,
not that's how you get gonorrhea, but you know what I mean.
Right. Never eating at Chipotle again.
But it's he throws this out. If someone breaks into your house, you don't declare laws against burglary futile and pointless. Are you just supposed to say, let's make burglary really, really illegal, more illegal than it already is, and maybe people won't break in?
It's extra illegal. And the USDA thing, I mean, I actually wanted to look that up. Does the USDA actually prevent us from being poisoned? No, 48 million Americans get foodborne illnesses every year, and 3,000 of them die. So much for the government coming and saving us from food poisoning. At this point in the argument, it is customary to either demand an instant comprehensive program that will, quote-unquote, solve gun violence, prefatory to picking it to death or simply dismissing it on the grounds that it will not eliminate 100% of all gun deaths. Who does this guy argue with? I mean, first he goes on this, he starts out on the rant that we can't outlaw evil, and because we can't outlaw evil, we shouldn't have any laws, which is not something that any of us has ever argued. And now he suggests that those of us in the gun rights community, our next point is, well, you have to have a perfect plan to solve gun violence. Nobody's saying that. Anybody in the gun rights community would be willing and open to listening to ideas that will actually make a difference. Not the same old cliched knee-jerk reactions, but something that would actually make a difference. We know there's not going to be a perfect solution. And that's the reason that I think that's what sets us apart from the left on this issue. We know there's not an easy solution to this problem. And they seem to think that gun laws are going to instantly make us safer.
I would love to live in a world where, gosh, if we just did the right things and passed the right laws, we'd have nirvana. We'd have a perfect utopia. But I'm a little too intelligent to believe that's possible because we live in a sinful and fallen world. To go back to Cain and Abel, if only they had rock control.
Right. Why didn't God ban rocks?
Or at least rocks over a certain weight.
Right, we'd be so much better off. But I propose something much more modest. And here's the first of the anti-gun cliches. Let the CDC do the study of gun violence that the gun-controlled GOP has been blocking in Congress for 21 years. So that we have something called quote-unquote facts, so that we can know what we are talking about in preparation for actually acting to reduce our gun slaughter rate from the highest in the civilized world to something less barking insane.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm going to read the next paragraph because the two go together and they're so stupid it makes my head hurt. I'm going to have to go and get some... God is a God of light. Darkness hates light, which is why the gun cult fights this study, because it desires darkness and ignorance to prevail and mammon to be exalted over human life. I advocate light. Let the CDC at long last do the study. If you oppose it, you love the status quo, meaning you seek to protect both ignorance and death. It really is that simple. Choose life, not death. This is so moronically stupid that if we only let the CDC do a study, we'd have life? This is just so colossally pig ignorant.
No one is blocking the CDC from studying gun violence. No one. Here's the thing. Okay, this goes back to the 1996 Dickey Amendment, which stated quite simply, none of the funds made available for injury prevention and control at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention may be used to advocate or promote gun control. So what did the CDC do after that? They took the $2.6 million that they had been budgeted for studying quote-unquote gun violence, and they used that to study traumatic brain injury instead. So if the CDC was prohibited from using public funds, taxpayer dollars, to advocate or promote gun control, and they suddenly spend that money on traumatic brain injury instead, what does it tell you the CDC was spending that money on in the first place?
Yep.
The CDC is still collecting data on quote-unquote gun violence.
Exactly.
But they are barred from using taxpayer dollars to push a political point.
Yes, exactly. And this is so cliched. And when this guy talks about facts and being informed and desiring that we get rid of ignorance and come out into the light, this guy doesn't know jack.
No.
Because we can, the law doesn't prevent doing straight up research as long as it's not advocacy research where we're trying to actually, push a political position. And there's nothing stopping private research. There's plenty of private research.
Yes. We've got the Brady Group. We've got Moms Demand Action. We've got all these
Bloomberg and his millions of dollars every year.
And it's not the GOP-controlled Congress. It hasn't been controlled by the GOP for 21 years. You had several years during the Obama administration when it wasn't controlled by the GOP.
In 2008, 2009, we had, in 2010, we had Obama and his party in control of both houses. They could have done anything they wanted to.
Yes.
Republicans, the gun cult controlled GOP, didn't have enough votes to stop anything for a good 2 years. And yet, what happened? The Democrats didn't change this, didn't do anything to change the Dickey Amendment. It's the automatic reaction that if we don't get what we want, if Congress doesn't do what we want on gun control, then it must be the GOP that's blocking everything. It's the GOP's fault. It's those darn gun cult GOP members. When in 2008, 2009, 2010, Obama had complete control of Congress and veto-proof majority in the Senate, could have done whatever he wanted at that point, didn't do it. But it's the GOP's fault.
Yeah. Even though the CDC could easily have done a study, but because they're prohibited from doing advocacy with taxpayer dollars, they didn't.
Mm-hmm. So they could start tomorrow and do an unbiased study with taxpayer dollars, but that's not what they want to do.
No. And the origin of the Dickey Amendment, this is an article from Politico. Now, granted, it was an article that is by Chris Cox, who is a member of, he's an NRA, I think he's an NRA spokesperson.
I think he's the vice president, isn't he?
Oh, maybe he is. So this is by Chris Cox of the NRA, but it's printed in Politico, which Politico is a left of center website, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is from an article titled "Why We Can't Trust the CDC with Gun Research." And I just want to read 3 paragraphs from this. It says, government-funded research was openly biased in the 1990s. CDC officials unabashedly supported gun bans and poured millions of dollars into quote-unquote research that was, in fact, advocacy. One of the lead researchers employed in the CDC's effort was quoted stating, "We're going to systematically build the case that owning firearms causes death." Another researcher said he envisioned a long-term campaign to convince Americans that guns are, first and foremost, a public health menace. One of the effort's lead researchers was a prominent attendee at a conference called the Handgun Epidemic Lowering Plan Network, which was intended to form a public health model to work towards changing society's attitudes towards guns so that it becomes socially unacceptable for private citizens to have guns. The problem with these conclusions is that they came before the data, which was manipulated to support their agenda. The spin was so egregious that Congress acted and forbade the use of taxpayer funds for such biased, agenda-driven research.
All right, so this guy's complaining about not having any facts, but here's some facts that maybe our esteemed neckbeard doesn't know. In a nation of over 300 million people, we have only 12,000 people die of gun-related homicide every year. We know the vast majority, like you keep pointing out, the vast majority of gun violence deaths are criminals killing criminals. Overall, the homicide rate has been declining for, 50 years? Levels off for a time or two, but the general trend has been downward for 50 years. We know the majority of violent crime, this is another statistic that you point out, the majority of violent crime is centered around major cities, most of those run by one particular party and heavily gun controlled. We know from independent research, there was something that popped up on my timeline the other day. It was an article from last year, a study that showed that only about 16% of gun crimes are committed by people who actually legally own the gun that they use to commit the crime.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. We know from studies, actual peer-reviewed studies by like Duke University and the University of Pittsburgh, that only about 2% of criminals acquire their guns at gun shows, but we're constantly screaming about closing the gun show loophole. Then, of course, there's this whole CDC thing. I mean, we don't desire darkness, as this guy tries to point out or suggest. We just don't like propaganda.
Right. Right.
So back to the article. Oh, and stop saying it's a heart problem, not a gun problem. When you tell that lie, what you're really saying is that Americans are uniquely sinful out of the whole human race, and that why we slaughter each other and ourselves with guns more than the rest of the civilized world. No, we are not uniquely evil. We have easy access to guns, and that's why we slaughter ourselves and each other with guns more than the rest of the world. It's a gun problem.
Yeah, no.
Again, with not having any facts.
Of all the nations in the world, okay, there's 195 countries in the world. All right?
Okay.
We rank, guess where the United States ranks in instances of quote-unquote gun violence per the number of guns, keeping in mind that we have the largest number of guns per people in the entire world. Guess where we rank out of the 195 countries?
Number one, right? I mean, we're number one.
This guy would love to think so. We are the 28th lowest.
Well, shocker.
Shocker. Here's another little tidbit of information. If you take suicide out of the picture, we rank 18th in homicides committed with a firearm. So you've got Honduras and Venezuela, Guatemala, El Salvador, Colombia, Brazil, Panama, Philippines, Mexico, Costa Rica. All these, most of them are South American countries. And guess what? They have strict gun control.
Yep. We do not slaughter ourselves more than the rest of the world, even when you consider just gun violence. I mean, if you want just to look at the slaughter rate, to use his terminology, I guess, the murder rate in the U.S. is like 4.8 per 100,000, right?
Something like that, yeah.
That ranks us like 96th or 97th. So there's 96 or 97 other countries ahead of us. Countries with very strict gun control laws. Russia is at 11. They've got less than half our population, 3 times the homicide rate, and more total murders than we do every year. Mexico, which has really, really strict gun control laws, 16. Brazil, 26. They may be great in soccer, but the national pastime is dodging bullets.
I hate to laugh, but it's true.
And Honduras, 63. El Salvador, 108 at the top of the list. Venezuela, that socialist paradise, a country 1/10 our size with 12 times more murders per capita, 57 per 100,000. And they've got more total murders per year than we do. That's shocking.
Very shocking. Very shocking.
But they're not civilized, I guess. They're not civilized countries, so we only compare us to the civilized countries, I guess.
That's racist. He's calling them uncivilized.
Really?
Does he not like brown people now?
Apparently.
Isn't that usually the accusation leveled against conservatives when we talk about things like stopping illegal immigration?
Well, if you're going to suggest that your comparison is only to the quote-unquote civilized world in order to make us look worse than we really are, then yeah, you're basically saying all these brown-skinned folks are not civilized.
Hey, his words, not mine.
Exactly. And by the way, when you make that argument, you are also inevitably arguing, here goes the really... Just as we should do nothing to keep small arms out of the hands of criminals, maniacs, morons, domestic abusers, stalkers, and terrorists, and instead just pray for their hearts to change, nobody's arguing this.
Right. And we already do everything we can to do exactly just that.
Right. But he continues, so you also must mean that we should do the same thing with really big arms when it comes to Kim Jong-un and ISIS. There it is, the stupidest thing you will hear all day.
Yes. I don't want to say it's the stupidest thing we'll ever hear when we're doing this podcast because, as we've been proven before,
right?
Never say never.
And we still have a couple or 3 more paragraphs, so he's still got time to impress us. Now, like you said, we already have laws to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and maniacs and domestic abusers and stalkers and terrorists. And as for morons, just go to a public range and you'll see we can't legislate stupid. But if we did, this guy would be in trouble. This paragraph. Oh, and this one's fantastic. I take it back. This one is stupider. You know, the argument that typically comes next is that that we don't allow people to own bazookas and nuclear weapons, right? So we do allow some gun control. The argument that is typically trotted out against us. Well, here's the worst possible use of that line of reasoning. It's not a nuke problem, it's a heart problem, is something only a fool would say.
Like this guy.
And that's why nobody says it, you moron. Come on. How do we deal with rogue countries that have nukes? Or, I mean, before Obama started selling nukes.
I was going to say, because, I was going to say give them millions and millions of dollars like we did with Iran.
Before Obama, we used to make sure that those countries knew that there would be a price to pay if they used a nuke.
Mutually assured destruction.
So with guns, same reasoning. You want to make sure that every responsible citizen in the country knows that they don't have to have a gun, but they have a right to have one for their protection. And criminals who suspect that their prey is armed, they're not gonna. And if this is borne out in research by actually interviewing these people in prison, they would prefer not to attack people if they suspect they have guns.
Right.
So they go look for easier prey.
Right.
The threat of an armed response, whether you're talking about a nation or a criminal, is a powerful means of protection, and this guy doesn't get it.
Right. Well, yeah, it's if you ask most criminals, they preferred to avoid lead poisoning at all costs.
Right, exactly. Have a strict aversion to lead poisoning.
Now, I got to warn you, though, I think the next sentence is these... it ranks up there with the stupidest sentences in this piece.
He's running it's running a close second if it's not, But this lie is one of the core lies the gun cult tells every day about a slightly smaller grade of weapon, and they say it while lying that the Second Amendment exists so that we can make war on the constitutional order that gives us the Second Amendment. That was tried in 1861. Bad idea.
Did you catch what he was saying there? He was referring to those firearms that you can own legally as a slightly smaller grade of weapon than a nuke.
Well,
I can't kill 1 million people in one shot with my guns. It's not a slightly smaller grade of weapon.
It's an order of magnitude smaller. Oh my gosh. And then the Second Amendment doesn't exist so we can make war on the constitutional order. 1861, the Civil War was not about the Second Amendment. Oh
no.
God.
It was about the southern states who wanted to secede. In fact, I don't want to get into a big, huge thing on the cause of the Civil War, but the Secretary of State, Seward, warned Lincoln that if he continued to garrison the troops at Fort Sumter, it would lead to war. And Lincoln's response was, so be it. So the people call it the War of Northern Aggression for a reason. But anyway.
So historically illiterate to his list of accomplishments. Oh my God. Fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life. If you plan to make war on the supposedly tyrannical U.S. government, be aware you are bringing your cache of small arms to a fight with a state that has drones. Here's the other thing you hear all the time. Drones, tanks, high-altitude bombers, and tactical nukes. If it is as tyrannical as you claim, it will use them against you while you and the whack job militia. Notice he puts the Second Amendment in he doesn't capitalize Second and Amendment, but he capitalizes whack job militia. You and the whack job militia are in your living room knocking back brewskis and planning your next assault on a bird sanctuary, and you will never see it coming. It's like he's dredged up every clueless anti-gun argument that the left has ever trotted out and pasted them into this article like they're some kind of enlightened new thinking. Like nobody's ever made these arguments before. Because we've heard this stupidity about, you think you can defend against a tyrannical government with your AR-15 because the government's got tanks.
we haven't, but in all fairness to this guy, we haven't heard the argument before with such a magnitude of stupidity mixed into it.
This is true. This is true. Credit where credit is due.
Don't want to shortchange him.
Right. Best construction on everything. The Second Amendment is intended as a hedge against tyranny, right? That the common citizen could also aid in the defense of the country in a time of war.
Right.
Only the really wacky conspiracy theorists, and there are some, and most Democrats who hate Trump, only those people think that we're currently in threat of tyranny from the government. But that doesn't mean it never could happen.
But here's something that's also very ironic about all this, is that what groups in recent months have talked about possibly taking up arms against the government?
Right. It's only okay when you're doing it on the left.
Antifa, they're cool, but those those rascally conservatives.
We don't think that tyranny is something that's just lurking right around the corner, but it is a possibility, and we've seen the deep corruption that our government has gotten itself into just recently been revealed. What the Obama administration did for 8 years, their lawlessness and lies, and despite saying they were going to be the most transparent administration ever, their constant deceit and use of government agencies as weapons against their political opponents, it could go bad if we allowed it to. And that's why we need the Second Amendment. And the fallacy that the military is just like the Republican Guard in Iran or something and just going to fall into line and nuke their own families is insane. If the government turned tyrannical and we had to defend the country against a tyrannical government, guess what most of the military would probably do?
Yeah, exactly.
They would.
maybe not, your people at the higher echelons who are political appointees, but the majority of the average men and women in the armed forces are fairly politically conservative.
Well, and they're probably not going to simply follow orders when that order is drop a nuke on your neighbors.
Right.
Kill your family that's, decided to side with the government or against the government.
Right.
And if you think that a poorly armed citizen can't fight a technologically superior military, ask our veterans from Vietnam or the Russian veterans or the American veterans who fought in Afghanistan, because we fought some pretty darn difficult opponents in both of those theaters.
Right.
The Soviets lost. We pulled out of Vietnam, and not because we were facing a technologically superior foe, but one that was determined and used the resources they had at hand to the best of their ability.
Right. And it seemed they had an endless resource of people willing to die for the Viet Cong.
True. That always makes it easier.
Yes.
And we had politicians in this country who weren't willing to do what was necessary to win.
Right.
So by all means, pray for conversion of hearts, but also don't hand murderous people guns, because they make it really easy to mow down 500 people in ways that a rock or a penknife does not. A penknife? Every sensible person in the world, except members of the gun cult, lying that you can't outlaw evil, gets that.
Yeah, I missed the part in the gun laws where we hand murderous people guns that can mow down 500 people.
The only people handing guns to murderous people, in fact, is our government, if you think about it. They didn't stop the guy in Charleston at the church in Charleston when he shouldn't have had a gun. Our government allowed him to get one. There was the guy in the two in San Bernardino. They did nothing about, ignored the warnings. There was the Orlando killer, did nothing about him. The guy in New York, the one that he references in this article, the guy who ran over the people in Lower Manhattan, the government knew about him, did nothing, didn't open a case on him despite his connections to terrorism.
And he was brought into the country through the diversity lottery program as well.
Yes.
Thank you, government.
Yes, so much for saying that, when we argue that there are things that could have been done to have stopped or to have prevented what happened in New York, the stupid diversity visa program is one of the things we could stop.
Yep. Which, by the way, the Democrats are trying to preserve at all costs.
Oh, yes.
But, the Sutherland Springs shooter,
failed to stop him.
Yeah.
The government. And he worked for the government.
He worked for the government. He was convicted of a felony by the government.
And let's not forget, we sold guns to Mexican drug cartels.
Yes, who have used those guns to kill border agents.
And hundreds of people in Mexico.
Yes. But that was to keep us safe, don't you know?
What are your final thoughts on this? I mean, this isn't like our typical, he uses very little scripture. This is just venting and letting your hate flag fly, basically.
Yeah, the closest he gets to bringing scripture into this is a couple paragraphs before the end of the article where he says, God is a God of light. Darkness hates light. Well, what did David say in Psalm 27? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. How did they stumble and fall? At the sword of David and his men. Yep. So David didn't say the Lord is my light and then he suddenly turned into a pacifist and God just miraculously wiped out his enemies. God gave him victory over his enemies through the use of force.
Right.
This article is a perfect example of how if you have bought the lies hook, line, and sinker about quote-unquote gun violence as if it's the guns doing these acts of evil as opposed to an evil person pulling the trigger, then yeah, all of this makes perfect sense. But because he's bought the lies hook, line, and sinker, he will refuse to see any evidence to the contrary. He talks about facts and quotes. Well, everything that he puts forward in this article is a quote-unquote fact. In other words, not a fact. Conjecture, lies, deception, providing...
flat out ignorance.
Yes. Without providing a shred of evidence to support anything he says.
Right. Let's talk about the antinomian thing because he applies this, suggests that that antinomianism is our favorite heresy. As Christians, how should we view the law? Should we simply, if someone proposes a law that supposedly that they claim is going to make us safer, if we reject that law out of hand, are we somehow are we in the wrong there? Should we, as Christians, should we support law just because it's for the common good, supposedly?
Well, it all comes down to what St. Peter said before the Jewish authorities back in the book of Acts. I want to say it's chapter 4. They had just been arrested for preaching the gospel. They were told to no longer preach the gospel or further punishment would come their way. They were then released. But before they were released, when they were commanded to no longer preach the gospel, Peter responds, "It is better to obey God rather than men." So, first and foremost, if there are any laws that are directly contradictory to the Christian faith, such as abortion and the like, then we ought to fight against those laws because they fly in the face of God's word. When it comes to the rest of laws that are purely secular in nature, well, we can, according to our Christian freedom, pick and choose those laws which we wish to support, as long as we're not making a decision regarding our faith. So when it comes to this idea of antinomianism, really what's happening here is he's setting himself up as an antinomian because he rails against the laws. He insists that we need more laws to stop quote-unquote gun violence. He rails against gun owners who are opposed to gun control. And really what he's doing all along is he is opposing the established laws of the government. So as, when it comes back to our obligation as Christians, we have what Paul writes in Romans 13, where we are obligated to be obedient to the government, to submit to the authorities and so forth. Understand that in light of what happens in the book of Acts and with what St. Peter says, that as long as it doesn't conflict with our faith as God's children.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for this week's edition. Thank you for joining us, Pastor. And if any of you have questions about anything you heard here, any comments or concerns, send us a email or a voice message or a voicemail by visiting our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. And we would love to hear from you and respond to your comments or questions on a future episode. Tune in again next time for another edition of Clinging to God and Guns right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you all for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. Thank you to our fine sponsors who make all this possible. Thank you to my awesome cast of contributors. And thank you, dear listener, for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.